Oh, welcome to the 3x5 news, views, and reviews. Scribble and index cards. We get in and we get out fast, so keep up. And oh, I am the real true American patriot. Now that I have your attention, you know that popular phrase, speak into existence? It means that if you say something out loud, you can make it happen. To me, it sounds more like make a wish. In other words, don't hold your breath. But there was one man who has a singular talent for speaking into existence not just ordinary goals, but wild and crazy dreams. In other words, if Donald Trump keeps talking about something, you better take it seriously because the odds are that it's game on. Lights, camera, action. The most recent example is his snatch and grab operation on Venezuela's President Maduro. As preoccupied as he had been by that over the years, he has also been thinking aloud about glomming up Greenland, subsuming it into the United States, or, as he sees it, his real estate portfolio. This is Trump speaking it into existence. Open quote. We are going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not. Close quote. Open quote. Anything less than U.S. control is unacceptable. Close quote. Wait a minute. Isn't that conquering? You know, like Russia with Ukraine and Nazi Germany with, well, everybody. Since World War II, the existence of the United States and the free world is predicated on renouncing such behavior. To begin with, under the UN Charter, I know mere mention of the UN makes Stephen Miller and J.D. Vance break out in bouts of uncontrollable laughter. Anyway, under the UN Charter, it is forbidden to seize the territory of another state. A sovereign state is one that is endowed with authority over the land and people within its own borders. Sometimes that's a problem, as when a state wages war against its own people. All things considered, though, it's really just common sense. You have heard of mutual assured destruction. ChatGPT calls sovereignty a, open quote, mutual survival pact. I don't invade you, you don't invade me, close quote. Wait, isn't Greenland kind of a throwback, under control of another country, Denmark? Not entirely. A one-time colony, and then actually a county of Denmark. Greenland is now autonomous, except that currently Denmark pays for 30 to 40% of Greenland's budget. In addition, Denmark handles Greenland's military defense. The defense is bolstered because Denmark is among the 32 members of NATO, founded in 1949 for mutual defense against Russian aggression. All in all, kind of a sweet deal for a nation with such a small population, about 56,000. Why does the U.S. want Greenland? I keep transposing the two names. The way it's going, Greenland will soon become our Ukraine. Here's a quick review of what Trump and his sycophants want with Greenland. Yes, sycophants. You can use that if you want. Here's a quick review of what Trump and his sycophants want with Greenland. First, they maintain that it will improve U.S. security in the region when Arctic waterways open up due to global warming. Former Pentagon official John Conger said of Trump, open quote, his fixation on Greenland is an admission that climate change is real, close quote. Those shipping lanes will be filled with Chinese ships, which will now enjoy a faster trade route to Europe than going all the way down to the Panama Canal, as well as Russian ships asserting their dominance and access to mineral resources at the bottom of the sea. Also, Trump et al. Seek access to Greenland's rare earths and minerals critical to smartphones and defense technology. Perhaps further down the list, Big Tech wants to build data centers in Greenland, partly because cooling the servers will be less of an issue in a land made of ice. Then, presumably at the edge of their consciousness, planning to build bases around the world, including in Greenland, is the Praxis Network. The what? The Praxis Network is a self-proclaimed political ecosystem. In and aside, I'm not crazy how they co-opt the word ecosystem. Praxis rejects annoying little norms such as democracy and human rights in favor of state power. Good luck with that, you wacky praxis. Also, if you're going to plop yourself down in Greenland, you better enjoy skiing. Or how about winter rodeos with, instead of bull riding, musk ox riding, and instead of bareback bronc riding, caribou riding? Oh, and don't forget polar bear wrestling. All comers welcome. I'd like to see Trump in the ring with one of those wearing sumo garb. Wait, why did I say that? I will never get that image out of my head. But what do Greenlanders think about Trump's plans for their country? Predictably, they are experiencing, as the Times reports, slightly edited, open quote, shock, anger, confusion, humiliation, insult, and, most of all, fear. No one, Times reporters spoke to, wants Greenland to be recolonized. And very few have any interest in joining the United States. One told them she was well aware of the holes in the U.S. healthcare system and its gaping economic inequality. Close quote. Presumably trying to quiet the backlash to the prospect of an invasion, Trump and Rubio bandied about the subject of buying Greenland. Rubio floated the figure of $100,000 for each Greenlander. But, according to ChatGPT, open quote, cities like Nuuk, the capital, are comparable to very high-cost cities in the U.S. like New York City or San Francisco, while remote towns are even pricier because of shipping costs. Close quote. In other words, while Rubio might be thinking that living under such stark conditions, Greenlanders would be grateful for the pittance he offered, it's an insult to them. Not to mention to Americans, whose reaction will most likely be, open quote, you're paying Greenlanders $100,000 each? Well, what about us? Close quote. Good job, Marco. You have stepped onto MAGA's no man's land. It's dead zone. Nothing defines MAGA more than deep resentment that anyone should get a benefit that they don't. In fact, it's the mark of the MAGA. And once purchased, what about Greenlanders' healthcare, currently subsidized by Denmark? The U.S. would have to choose between a rock and a hard place of subsidizing Greenlanders' healthcare, which would further enrage not only MAGA, but most Americans are trying to induce Greenlanders to buy healthcare through the Affordable Care Act, with its ever-increasing premiums. Aside from paying Greenlanders, which probably also includes subsidies for the operation of the government, there is the cost of the actual attack, something conspicuously lacking in polls. Instead of polls asking Americans if they support attacking in Venezuela, which yield disconcertingly high figures of approval, polls should ask, do you support the U.S. operation on Venezuela, estimated to cost $60 to $100 million, and if we stayed there a year, $6 billion? Nothing like a little context, right? Watch that support fall off a cliff. Attacking Greenland would probably be at least as expensive. Any possible financial return, such as from oil in Venezuela or resources from Greenland, would take a decade or more. Hey, it's the only time Trump has exhibited long-term thinking. Except that he's so obtuse he doesn't know that. He expects quick return on its investments. Americans staggering under the costs of living will be thrilled to see their taxpayer dollars spent thusly. As for the buying approach, here's a way of looking at it that might give you empathy. Empathy, just for woke snowflakes. Anyway, here's a way of looking at it that might give you empathy for Greenland's dilemma. Imagine if China offered to buy the U.S. Huh? At first glance, that sounds insane. But if Trump got the biggest cut, say $3 trillion, he would probably jump at the opportunity to become the richest person in the world. And if each American were offered $250,000, a more realistic figure than the $100,000 Rubio offered to Greenlanders, would we sign on the dotted line? I suspect many would. First, Trump supporters take their cues from their cult leader. Then, when I laid out the scenario to someone close to me, she said something to the effect of, hell yeah, it can't be any worse than life under Trump. How does Trump's annexation of Greenland look right now? kind of like a foregone conclusion, to tell you the truth. On January 15th, the Times reported that at a meeting the day before, open quote, Denmark's foreign minister Lars Loke Rasmussen said that we didn't manage to change the American position, close quote. Meanwhile, in an important development, Denmark has announced that it will conduct additional military exercises in Greenland with 3 other NATO countries, Germany, France, and Sweden. That's partly, I think, to show their ability to deter Russia and China. Of course, if the U.S. attacks Denmark in the guise of Greenland, NATO's Article 5 requires its member countries to come to its defense to the best of their abilities. In the event of the unheard of, an attack by one NATO member on another, would those countries, such as the ones that are currently showing up for military exercises, actually go to war against the U.S. on behalf of Greenland and Denmark? In light of the vast superiority of U.S. armed forces, likely not. Also, would the U.S., newly divorced from Europe, continue its support of Ukraine, however limited and erratic? Likely not. But as one of my favorite international experts, Scott Lucas, said, the U.S., bogged down with Greenland, not to mention Venezuela and the global south, would not have the resources to significantly defend Ukraine even if it wanted to, which it has shown no indication of doing thus far. One NATO member, especially the U.S., going rogue and attacking another, would constitute the most alarming event in the Western world since World War II. In an aside, Russia attacking Ukraine was far from alarming, all too predictable. Such an action by the U.S. not only turns the whole world upside down, but leaves the U.S. absolutely friendless, like Russia. Finally, however much European military opposition to a U.S. invasion of Greenland might be muted, the U.S. will still face armed resistance. The citizens of Greenland are armed with high-powered rifles for hunting caribou. Lots of them. Rifles, that is. A commenter to my previous posts on Greenland wrote, open quote, do you think a handful of Greenlanders armed with 5-shot bolt-action rifles is going to hold off a Marine Corps expeditionary unit that has air, naval, armor, and artillery support? And the Danes have 2 dog sleds as defense, close quote. Of course not. Greenland would not go to war with the U.S. Instead, they would mount a resistance after the fact. They may be acquiring actual arsenals as we speak. Picture them taking pot shots at American soldiers occupying their homeland. From everything I have heard, Greenlanders are possessed of a distinct don't tread on me mentality. They will fight with unrelenting zeal for their country, like the Continental Army and state militias did during the Revolutionary War, and like Ukraine is doing against Russia. However much the Trump administration thinks the invasion of Greenland would be a surgical strike, a splendid little war, as they used to say, it will most likely be a bloody mess for both sides, further cementing the Trump administration's depraved, pitiless, nihilistic legacy